do the exam because it really is easier than doing a poor paper. But if you're such a frightened person of exams, I shouldn't give you that choice, then you wouldn't be frightened and you'd have to do it and every that. So anyway, if you write the exam, don't like it, you can throw it in the wastebasket, go out and do a paper, that's okay. You don't have to hand in your exam. You know, I think you did a good job on it. You think it's a total bust or something. Let's see what happens next week. Let me get on with this material, okay? We didn't mention that the Roman general who storms Jerusalem with Herod is called Sosius. Not that it matters. I don't think I'd ask you a question like that. But he, in the Antiquities, Josephus makes it clear that again, Polio and Samaeus recommend to the people not to resist Herod. There's a whole Christian doctrine of non-resistance to evil coming to the fore there, but they're the Pharisees. As Paul says, he's a Pharisee of the Pharisees. This is basically the Pharisee approach to this people. You know, accommodate to Roman power. Accommodate to the Herodians. Don't resist. And it says they recommended opening the gates to Herod the same way that they didn't want to prosecute Herod earlier. So in return, Herod kills all the previous members, all the members of the previous Sanhedrin except for them. And I think this is, by this time, certainly the rabbinic, heroic people, Hillel and Shammai. And I don't consider them heroic, obviously. Now, that's just me. I mean, I'm just weighing this as only an objective person, not propagandized by one religion or the other, perhaps would look at it. You know, just looking at the weighing, is this heroic behavior to, open the gates to people like this? No, I wouldn't think so. It's not heroic in my understanding what heroism is. So you're not going to make these people the heroes for people like me, but since the whole of the Jewish people is totally ignorant of this history as well as most Christians, it's easy to make those people heroes because they don't know anything more than most Christians do. In fact, probably less. So it's really sad. So you say, I mean, it's all here in Josephus? Well, you have to be able to read through Josephus, as we're seeing. But yeah, it's all here. And at least a good deal of it is here. And if you have some sense, I think you can probably easily understand all this. Anyway, Herod has already executed Hyrcanus. He also executes the mother, as I recall, of Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus, it's Miriam's mother. She's the last one to go, Miriam's mother, after everyone else is gone. I guess she's the daughter of Hyrcanus. Anyway, they all get executed in the end. That's how he pays back for favors rendered. And he's undisputed king by this point. Well, we now can skip up to, again, you can read all that. We're now down to 4 BC. Herod has basically been in power for 33 years or so. Josephus, I think he started remodeling the temple in 26 BC, as I recall from what Josephus just told us earlier. You can check the dates on that. According to Josephus, the temple is all worked on for the next 100 years or so, beautifying it, making it this splendid building, just in time for the Romans to destroy it in 68 and 70 to burn it all down. But the stones are still there. If you go to Jerusalem today, you see the huge stones of the Herodian temple. That's what the Wailing Wall is, the Herodian temple. It's not the Solomonic temple. And he enlarged it, and that's what you have. The dome on the rock is sitting on top of the Herodian platform there. And these stones, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the Wailing Wall, but these stones are huge pillars. They're literally, maybe, I don't know how many tons they would be, but they're very heavy, maybe 20 ton stones or something like that. They're very heavy stones. I may be exaggerating, 5 ton stones. I don't know what a ton is. 10,000 pounds or something. But they're very heavy. And they're very beautifully worked. You can always see the Herodian stone. And he built a lot of different places. He built in Samaria, he built in Greek cities. He was very big on building. So people usually remember him as Herod the Great because of his great building projects. But I would think it's more better to call him Herod the Terrible. Like Ivan the Terrible, the Russian monarch. I think that would be a more appropriate name for him than Herod the Great. Herod the Terrible. So, right before he's going to die, I think it's your page 115, we get this really interesting episode about the two, he calls them, in my translation, rabbis. But I think, in fact, the original Greek is sophists, which is the Greek word, which is the Greek word for a philosophical person who doesn't teach good wisdom, but bad wisdom, according to Socrates and Plato. Sophists just teach, sophistry.
Yes, sir. Are you talking about the 2 Reverend page 116?
Huh?
2 Reverend page 116?
Yeah. The Greek is sophist. But they're obviously rabbinical type person. With a great reputation for national exponents of national tradition, by which is meant the law, the Mosaic law, and were held therefore in the highest esteem by the whole nation. You see, so one of these people is called Judas, son of Sephareus, and the others are called Matthias. So we're into Maccabean names still again. Ultimately, these two rabbis, or sophists, or teachers, are executed. Actually, I think he has them skinned and burned or something. But they tell the young people, I don't want to read the whole thing, you can read it. If you want to strike a blow for God, to pull down the works that have been erected in the country contrary to the laws of their fathers. Now we're going to get into the Maccabean thing again, dying for the laws of the forefathers. And basically it's Maccabees 1 and 2. So we're 150 years later, and this thing is still going on. They urged the rabbis to cut down this Roman eagle that had been put over the gate of the temple compound, contrary to the laws of their forefathers. Because it was a glorious thing to die for the laws of the fathers. And for people who made such an end, what did, remember Maccabees 2? It's to make a good end. That's what the different teachers were teaching. Then you would be get resurrected. Remember? There would be sure hope of immortality. Same thing, the same be resurrected. And the eternal enjoyment of bliss, like the Muslims portray it. Whereas the mean-spirited, poor-spirited, who don't know anything about, this is said rabbinical wisdom, I don't know what the original Greek is here. But we're talking about martyrdom here. Cling to life out of ignorance and choose death by disease or old age or something, rather than death in a righteous cause. Death in the way of righteousness. This is the doctrine that has been emerging since the Maccabean period, re-emerging here. So this is not new, is it? But it's being preached anew. Well, the young men do that because they think Herod's dying. But they're arrested. Herod doesn't die. He's just sick. They are questioned. Who told you to do this? Maccabees 2. Same as the 7 brothers were in the other earlier too. The law of their fathers. It's the same answer the brothers give. Why made them so cheerful when they're going to make? This is exactly Maccabees 2. The knowledge that they would enjoy greater blessings after their death. And so the king exploded with rage. He called them temple robbers who pleaded the law as an excuse, wanted them to be punished for sacrilege, but he was afraid of the people maybe getting upset by being too harsh here. So he just took the ones who had lowered themselves from the roof and the rabbis. He burnt alive. The rest of the men, I don't know how many he handed over to his execution, his tenants for execution. This guy never quits, does he? Anyway, now the oracles, the diviners, whoever these people are saying that this disease he has is what he did to the two rabbis or wherever these teachers were. He went over to Jordan and he took the hot bath at this Kalirho place, between hot baths. And he knows he's dying here. So now his sister's got another husband. Salome's got Alexis now as her husband. Helsius or Alexis. And he tells his sister, none of these people are Jewish. Helsius, if you look carefully in the Antiquities, is Idumean. These are all Idumean people, Edomites, Arabs. I know the Jews will greet my death with wild rejoicing. Popular king. But I want to be mourned anyway. So arrest all these notables, put them in this stadium, and when I die, kill them all, so that everyone in Judea will be weeping. Again, I think the killing all the Jewish children thing is a mixture of his killing his own children in this episode. I mean, we're talking about literary inspiration to move on to a more poetic presentation. And also the Moses thing, that Pharaoh wanted to kill the Jews because they were multiplying too fast. So Moses escaped, so Jesus has to escape in the same way as Moses and so on. So it's a three-part source for that episode in Matthew. Okay, so Archelaus does succeed him, page 118. He's a son by another of his wives, I think a Samaritan wife. I think his mother's Maltese. You can see the genealogies in the back. My book's falling apart, so I don't want to open it to there. He's got another brother called Antipas here, page 118. These are tetrarchs. Tetrarchs is they rule a fourth of the country. So since Antigonus' death, Herod reigned 33 years. And I think from the time of his proclamation as king, when he got to Rome and got his proclamation, 40 years. So that's quite a long time here. And Archelaus is the next one. He's mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. And Archelaus was king, and Jesus' parents returned to, or as Matthew, one of the times, at the time of Archelaus, if you remember, if you know your Gospels. He's mentioned in Mark or in Matthew or Luke. Anyway, I think he's mentioned anyway. So there's a lot of unrest now under Archelaus, and he's not able to hold things under control. So the Matthew Gospel has Jesus born while Herod is still alive. So that has to be before 4 BC. But the Luke Gospel has Jesus born at the time of the census of Cyrenius or Quirinius, and that's here 7 AD. So the two Gospels, of course, contradict each other as far as when Jesus was born. So nobody knows when Jesus was born, really, because the two Gospels that deal with it disagree by 10 years. And the other Gospels don't deal with it smartly as it turns out. So when was Jesus born? Well, in people's mind, it's a combination of both of these. But as little knowledge becomes greater, it's dangerous to do that. So the problem here is the taxation. The census has to do with the taxation. And the reason they're taxing here is because they remove Archelaus. Now at the beginning, Archelaus, you see, lightens the taxation here in chapter 6, page 120. And the people want vengeance for the ones who had died for the laws of their country. They want to avenge these people who had executed these. So these are popular revolutionaries, as always. And they demand the appointment of a high priest of greater piety and cleanliness, purity. They want, the whole thing is the appointment of high priest. Who's the high priest going to be? Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's what they're interested in, the appointment of the high priest. And this has to be a perfectly righteous high priest. And that's not what's going on here. What's going on here, as the governors come in, the Herodian tetrarchs and things, you're getting appointment of corrupt high priests. These are the Sadducees. They're nothing like the Sadducees previously, who would have been pro-Maccabean revolutionaries. See what I mean? So you're getting a total change of establishment here. And everything happens at the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, Passover time. That's, of course, when the problems happen with Jesus, too. So the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, page 121. There's a great influx in the country for the festival. Those who were mourning the dead rabbis massed in the temple, increasing the sedition. And Archelaus was incapable of preventing the disease infecting the whole population. So again, over and over again, the population is diseased by revolutionary sentiments. The disease is revolution and sedition. I think at one point, when Paul is brought up for the Roman authorities, he's asked, are you one of these disease carriers upsetting the whole Roman Empire? The disease carriers are these people here. And the disease is righteousness, social revolution, and anti-tyranny and repression. So when this king sends his people out, they pelt the Roman cohort with stones, and then they go on sacrificing. So once again, we have this righteous priesthood. Well, we get a lot of revolutionary strife here before Archelaus is finally removed. Pentecost, you see, page 123, on the eve of Pentecost, people assembled to vent their wrath. An enormous crowd gathered from Galilee, Idumea, Jericho, Perea. So there's constant agitation. There's one guy in Sepharad, is the leader, is Judas, the son of Hezekiah. There he is. 126. That's Judas the Galilean. The Antiquities is clear about this. He and a guy called Zadok lead the revolt. So he's the son of Hezekiah, remember? This is God. This is Hezekiah. This is almost 50 years on. So he can't be such a young man here, unless it's the grandson. Descendant may be a better word. There's a shepherd king here. He puts on the crown. So you see, we have a whole series of messianic individuals developing. As we would expect, once the Maccabean family is basically eliminated and destroyed, then a new principle comes into effect. And Jesus in the scripture is basically one of these people. We have at the end of this chapter Simon the Essenes. At this point, too, starting in chapter 7, Josephus describes the various sects. I don't know what page exactly that is. I have it, mine is put in the back here as a, for some reason he put it back here, but it's in chapter 7, 135, I think. There are three schools of thought, 133. The Essenes are the most severe, and you can read that now. Notice that the thing that triggers the discussion of the sects is there's all this revolutionary unrest, particularly Judas the Galilean, who, as he said, is the author of the fourth school, but he doesn't really tell us much about them. But he doesn't even call them zealots at this point, but later on we hear that they're zealots. But not till the war against Rome does he start using the word zealot to describe them. Anyway, they don't like wealth, promiscuity, they consider oil to be polluting. James, the brother of Jesus, if you know anything about him, didn't use oil and wore only linen. They only wear linen, it says here. You have to read all this yourself. They're wonderfully devoted to the ancient writers. Josephus likes these people. He describes them in great detail. Whether it's from the earlier work or his own, I don't know. He says he spent time in his autobiography in the wilderness. When he was young, he tried all the sexes. He spent time with a bather called Banus, who only wore trees that grew on trees, meaning vegetable matter clothing, not animal clothing, linen. Let's see. They swear to impart their teaching to no one. They expel people from their group. They're divided into 4 grades. 136. They're long-lived, living over a century.
They don't marry.
He said second order does marry here.
First one doesn't.
First one doesn't. So we're basically getting Christian type of monasticism already. He does say at one point that under loving God, some of these customs are loving God. That's piety towards God. That would be their duties towards God. And then loving your fellow neighbor is the righteousness towards your fellow man. I don't know where he says this, but he does divide up his description like that of them. Yeah, he says there's a second order that do marry. But the women are very chaste when they dress just as the men. They wear clothes in the water. The Pharisees are the next, and this is where the New Testament gets its picture of Pharisees from, because all the New Testament really knows about Pharisees is that they believe in resurrection of the dead and the Sadducees don't, and that's all he says here about them, basically. So the authors of the New Testament are picking that up off. There seems there's much more to say about Pharisees than that. And he says that's all basically I wish to say about the sex. But you see, he doesn't tell us about Judas the Galilean, with whom he began the description. Now in the Antiquities, which I have someplace here, there's a different description, which is by the amount of time he takes here to talk about the Essenes, he clearly thinks a lot of them. But in this Antiquities, he actually doesn't give the Essenes a long description like he does in the war, but he seems to cut a piece from his description of the Essenes and add it to his description of the so-called fourth philosophy of Judas the Galilean. I'm not sure I can find it here. Let's see if I can find it here. Here it is. He says at the beginning of book 18 that there was one Judas a Gaulonite, that means from the Golan, whose name, a city whose name was Gamala, so he comes from this place up in the Golan Heights above the Sea of Galilee called Gamala, who had a companion called Sadduq, a Pharisee, S-A-D-D-U-K. And they were zealous to draw the people to revolt, saying that taxation was no better than slavery. And he exhorted the people to assert their liberty, as that God would assist them if they did this. And they inspired a fourth philosophical sect among us. But because of them, our country was filled with tumults, and they laid the foundation for our future misery, because of their way of thinking, which before we were unacquainted with, he claims, but I think the Maccabee books already have this. And this rather because the infection, this disease, which spread thence among the younger group people who were zealous for it, brought our people to destruction. So he blames the group of Judas and Sadduq in 7 AD when Cyrenius came to Palestine to take the census. So just as Jesus is born at the time of the census, so is the movement of Judas and Sadduq. And I think there's something going on there in that. And he says here, one Joazer, a son of Boethus, which was another of Herod's wives. Miriam was the daughter of Boethus, a priest he brought in from Egypt. He argued that you should pay the Roman tax. So you have what I would call the Herodian Sadducees, this Boethus person, arguing for paying the tax. The Judas the Galilean group against it. He adds here, the fourth sect, the Judas the Galilean group, they were also called Galileans, which is interesting. When Jesus' followers, are you a Galilean? I mean, are you from Galilee, or are you a Galilean member of this Galilean sect, a follower of Judas the Galilean? That isn't totally clear. They agree in all things with the Pharisees, but they have an inviolable attachment to liberty. And they say God is our only Father or Lord. So in Palestine, you see, nothing belongs to Caesar, everything belongs to God. So when you say whose picture's on the coin, in the New Testament picture of Jesus and the tax, that may not be a legitimate question for these people. Because they would say, Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and God's what is God's. That's supposed to be the Pharisee position. But the Zealot position would be, no, nothing is rendered to Caesar, everything to God. God rules here, not Caesar. So the question is, did Jesus really say those things? I mean, personally, I don't think he did. Because a lot of people don't know that he said those things to his followers. I think Paul said those things. And Paul encouraged the people to pay the taxes in Romans, as I think I've told you. And the question is, that's what the historical Jesus is all about. What can we really say about Jesus, and what can we be sure of, and what are we not sure of? Anyway, you see this picture in the Antiquities is much different. Essenes just gives a paragraph to. There are about 4,000 men that live in the way of Essenes, he says. And then he said, as far as the Judas Galilean group, in Florus, which was the governor at the time of the uprising, the nation began to grow mad with this distemper, as he puts it. He was the procurator at that time, who made the Jews go wild by the abuse of his authority and made them revolt against the Romans. So by the time of Florus' time, 66 AD, the Jews were absolutely, totally insane with this Judas the Galilean philosophy. So what's the popular philosophy? The revolutionaries. Not the Pharisees, not the Sadducees. The revolutionaries. And you just have to read it carefully to get that. And it's clear, because the revolution is popular. This Joazer becomes high priest, by the way. So, anyway, that's from the Antiquities. So you can read it if you want, but if you want to stick to your description of the sects from the war, that's fine too. Anyway, here we have Judas the Galilean at the beginning of chapter 7. Coponius was sent as governor. Notice, he has the authority from Caesar to inflict the death penalty. So only the Roman governor has the authority to do the death penalty. That's anyone having mistakes about that too. And Coponius is the governor, but this Quirinius is he's the district commissioner. And in this time, a Galilean named Judas, he doesn't go into the movement, you see, which he does in the other book, because this is written 20 years before the other one. He probably isn't comfortable telling about it. Tried to stir the natives to revolt, and said they submitted to paying taxes to Rome after serving only God. They accepted human masters. This was a rabbi with a sect of his own, quite unlike the others. But he never tells us about it in the war. He tells us about the other three. Anyway, the Ethnarchy of Archelaus came under Roman rule. This is 7 AD. And then suddenly, the next thing we hear, Tiberius sends Pontius Pilate out. What's happened here? We have about a 30-year gap. Just the period we want to know about. Gap. What explains that? Well, I think Josephus' source broke off here. The Herodian source, probably, as I told you, Nicholas of Damascus and others. And he doesn't have another source. Plus, he's not born yet. So he's not really able to start telling us about anything until about 3540 AD. Because he's born in, I think he's born in 36 or something? Or 39, or, I think it's 36. It's 36, I think. 37, something like that. Anyway, so he's not able to tell us about anything in this period. So just the period we want to know, big hole. Right? So, there's not much left here to tell, because he's not telling it to us. So we're already in the late 30s and 40s. You have to go to the Antiquities, he tells a bit more. I told you a little bit about the John the Baptist thing, didn't I? I could read you from the Antiquities about John the Baptist, since that's an important thing. He does mention John the Baptist in the Antiquities, but he doesn't mention him in the war, of course. Which is, there are lots of things in the Antiquities that are not in the war because of this, greater willingness to be forthcoming. So let's see if I can, a lot about the Herodian family. Let's see if I can find more, this is, see if I can find this material about John the Baptist here. He dates John the Baptist around 36 AD. He doesn't date him in the way the New Testament dates him. Let me see if I can find this here. Let's see, here it is. About this time, this is long after, I think, Pontius Pilate has been recalled. He puts it around the time of Gaius Caligula. Herod the Tetrarch had married the daughter of Aretas, the Arab king, and lived with her a great while. And when he was in Rome, he lodged with Herod, who was his brother, but not by the same mother. For this Herod was the son of the high priest Simon's daughter. That's another son of Herod. However, he fell in love with Herodias. This is very confusing here. Herod the Tetrarch, meaning this is really Herod Antipas, A-N-T-I-P-A-S, who was the daughter of Aristobulus, blah, 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 the sister of Agrippa. This man ventured to talk to, anyway, he goes on about this. So he gives a whole thing. And you see, the wife of, the husband of Herodias here is not Philip. In the Gospels, Philip is the husband of her daughter Salome. Josephus doesn't know the name of the daughter, Salome's Dance of the Seven Bells. We only know the name of her daughter from Josephus. The New Testament doesn't know the name of the daughter. Only Josephus gives us the name of the daughter. In any case, to make a long story short, let's see if I can get this where the execution takes place. I can't find where it all is now about this. So detailed here. But to make a long story short, this Herod the Tetrarch, who takes Herodias from the previous husband, and John objects. It It's nothing to do with raising seed up to his daughter, up to the other son. I can't find the actual episode here. The reason that Herod the Tetrarch has John put to death is that he thinks he's so popular with the people that the people are willing to do anything that he would suggest. And he talks about John's baptism. He says that John's baptism was a water baptism only, and that it was meant to purify the body only, provided that the soul had been purified beforehand by the practice of righteousness. And in any event, then, let's see if I can find in my index here where this is exactly, because it's worth reading to you. So he thought that he should put John to death because John might suggest revolution. And he thought that it would be better to put him to death rather than to regret later not having done so. So after the event had already happened. So let's see, I think here it is. Okay, so there was a war between this Herod the Tetrarch, who's really, let me see if I can get this more clearly. It's really Herod, they're all called Herods, that's the point. It's really Herod Antipas. And the other one is not Herod Philip, it's Herod. So the previous husband is this Herod. Philip is the husband of Salome. This is all complicated. And these are all half-brothers. Herodias is their niece. And she's married to him, and then he takes her. But he only says that Philip didn't have any children by Salome. He doesn't say that anything about the idea of not having children or having children. So let's go back here then, since you know the New Testament. Let's finish this. Now the Jews thought the destruction of Herod's army, because he had previously been married to Aretas, the Arab king's daughter from across Jordan, as a punishment for what he did against John. So for the Jews, John was a popular ruler, and they blamed, they thought that Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch, came to a bad fate in this military engagement with the Arabs across the Jordan because of what he did to John, who was a righteous man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue both as righteousness towards one another, righteousness towards your fellow man, which I consider to be the righteousness commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, and piety towards God. That means loving God. So the two love commandments are loving God, piety towards God, loving your fellow man, righteousness towards your fellow man. That's what was John the Baptist's message. And so to come to baptism for that immersion or washing would be acceptable to him, God, if they made use of it not in order for the putting away of sins. So it wasn't for remission of sins, as the New Testament seems to think. John taught remission of sins in the wilderness or something. It was not for remission of sins, but for purification of the body only, supposing the soul had already purified beforehand by righteousness. Now when many others came to follow him, and he had a great following, they were greatly moved by hearing his word, so he's a popular Jewish leader. Herod feared the influence that John had over the people might put it in his power to raise an uprising, for they seemed ready to do anything he would advise, and so he thought it best that he put him to death and prevent any mischief he might cause, and not bring himself difficulties by sparing a man he might later repent of having been too lenient with. Accordingly, he sent John as a prisoner to Maccabees, the fortress I have previously mentioned, and there had him put to death. So, that's the Josephus picture of John. It's from the Antiquities. And this is around 38, that's why I haven't given it to you earlier, because this war that Aretas and Herod the Tetrarch, it's a little not a war, but a struggle, fight, is around 38.
What's the reference in the Antiquities?
It's Antiquities 18:5. Paragraph 2, but there's a different system by another kind of reckoning, but anyway, you'll find it. Okay. let's see where we are. I mean, we're getting constant problems here. We're in the, according to where we are in the war, we're in the late 30s, early 40s. He sends Pilate, according to page 138. The first thing that happens, the Romans want to put the busts of Caesar into Jerusalem. That is, the ensigns with the bust of Caesar, because by that time Caesar was considered a god, and they had the bust of Caesar on their ensigns. And the Jews saw this happening, and they got very upset, and they rushed to Pilate in Caesarea and begged him to remove the insignia, the pictures of the Roman emperors from Jerusalem. And at a prearranged signal, Pilate had the Jews assaulted by his troops in full armor, ring 3 deep, and he said that he would cut them all to pieces if they didn't allow the images in. And the Jews fell to the ground and bent to their necks and said they would be rather killed rather than transgress the law. So then Pilate relented. At another point, he has this thing built from the money he takes from the temple treasury. He has Jews who had gone to object, clubbed to death, others trampled by the mob, and so on. He's quite a brutal person, even in Josephus' picture. Philo, even the Jewish philosopher Alexander, gives even a worse picture, and says that he was so brutal that he was removed from the governorship. He's the only Roman governor to be so removed. So once again, we don't have a gentle Pilate. And as far as the Samaritans, I don't know if it's in here or the Antiquities, we have an episode where the Samaritans have a messianic leader, and Pilate goes to Samaria and crucifies all of the Samaritan troublemakers and lets the troops loose on the mobs there. So we have several pictures of Pilate's brutality in the War, the Antiquities, and in Philo. Well, okay. Tiberius is the emperor up to about 37. Gaius Caligula comes in. He's a bit mad. He wants Petronius, the governor of Syria. This is around, I don't know what page this is here. It's in chapter, it's about the 5th page of chapter 7. Gaius Caligula's cession of power. Do you know what page that is in your, it's my page. I'm an older version of it here. 139. What is it? One what?
I think it's 139.
Yeah, 139. So Gaius comes in around 37. Petronius with 3 legions comes into, he wants, Gaius Caligula wants his bust up in the temple. He didn't like what he heard about the situation with Pilate, obviously. And we have a whole thing about this, and then once again Petronius is clever. He's the one, he wrote the Satyricon, by the way. He's famous for having written that book in Roman literature. He holds up until Caligula is assassinated. And he didn't do it because he knew there'd be an uprising. Then this Agrippa I, finally, is sent out by Caligula and Claudius because he had been brought up with them. He's the grandson of, he's the son of one of the sons of Herod by Miriam that he had executed. And he was brought up as a royal personage in Rome with Caesar, in Caesar's family, in Augustus's family. And so he predicted that Caligula or Claudius would become emperor. So you get Augustus, I guess he's around from about, I don't know, he's there until about 14 or so. I don't have the dates in the back of my James book. Tiberius, he's there until about 37 or 36. Caligula, there until about 44 or 40 maybe, I don't know. I think it's 44. Then Claudius Robert Graves wrote a book, I, Claudius, which is, I think, I've got the dates a little wrong here, but it's close anyway. Nero takes over from Claudius. And then we have this new dynasty, the Flavians, who adopt Josephus. So that's Vespasian, the Roman general in Palestine. So things in Palestine do have an effect even here. And Titus, his son. And then Domitian, Titus's brother, all the way to 96. At which point, Trajan and Hadrian, all those guys. So, Agrippa I is, to some extent, in a situation of favored status with these Caligula Claudia ones. And he has the Maccabean blood, even though it's quite diluted. I would say maybe he's either a quarter or an eighth Maccabean by this time. You have to look at the genealogies. I have all the genealogies in the back of my James book if you want to look at them. Ron worked on that stuff. Ron DeBay, the fellow, was in here lecturing once. Noel's close associate. And you can look at those diagrams that I have, which I'm very interested in the genealogies because they're quite important. Here it gives a lot of genealogical material about the different families. He had 3 daughters, Bernicia, Mariam, and Drusilla. What page is that on? That's
143.
143, thanks. That's really important because Bernicia and Drusilla both appear in the book of Acts. Agrippa II, his son, also appears in the book of Acts. Paul talks very cordially with these people in the chapter 20s of the book of Acts. He has interviews with these people. Drusilla is introduced there, and she's not even mentioned. He calls her a Jewess. He doesn't even mention that. The author doesn't tell us that she's an Herodian princess. And Josephus tells us that she left the religion of her ancestors. But this time the Herodians have been Judaized. Drusilla, Josephus tells us just what she wasn't. She left the religion of her forefathers to marry Felix, the Roman governor in the 50s, who was a very brutal Roman governor after Pontius Pilate. Mariam, her sister, had several marriages. Finally, to the head of the community in Alexandria, who was very the wealthiest person in the Middle East, Philo's brother or nephew. Very wealthy Jewish family in Alexandria, Egypt. She divorced several husbands, married him, each one richer than the next. And then Bernicia was reputed, according to Josephus, to be the mistress of her brother Agrippa II, like Caligula and his sister was supposed to be involved in sexual dalliance. And ultimately, she was the mistress of Titus, the destroyer of Jerusalem. And Titus took her to Rome like a kind of Cleopatra. So she jumped from person to person. She also was very rich. She would be Herodias's niece. She would be the daughter of Herodias's brother. Herodias's brother is Agrippa I. That's why all these people want to marry Herodias, because they want to get close to Agrippa, who, after the death of Herod, king of Chalcis, Claudius gave the throne to his nephew, Agrippa, son of the first Agrippa. So we also should have Agrippa I dying somewhere here, but I don't have all that information. You can. So Agrippa II gets the throne somewhere in the 50s or late 40s. Notice at this point, Stephen, a slave of Caesar, is mentioned as being beaten by revolutionaries outside the walls of Jerusalem. There's constant bandits everywhere. The Jews in the whole country were in flames. There had been a tumult in the temple because on Passover, I think this is page 143, a Roman centurion who was on the temple colonnade. They were there to forestall rioting at these times by an unruly mob. He infuriated the crowd by lifting up his garment, meaning he showed them his uncircumcised or whatever sexual parts, which would upset them at Passover, obviously, and then bent over indecently, and turning his backside towards the Jews, made a noise as indecent as his attitude. In our language, if I can be crude, do you permit me? He blew a fart at them. I'm passing. Now, to me, you see, this is the real history. I don't accept the idealized history. This is what the real stuff of history looks like. It's crude, it's pretty gross, but this is the stuff people remember. And that caused a huge riot in the temple. The crowd rushed around, hurling stones at the soldiers, and it was in the aftermath of that this Stephen is beaten and is robbed of his things. That's also developed in the Antiquities. In any case, the whole country is seething with unrest. The crowds abandoned the feast, set out for Samaria. There's problems with Samaria. There were bandits and revolutionaries. And finally we get here, 146, I guess it is. The high priest Jonathan, son of Ananus, tried to calm things down, but in the meantime, Quadratus, who was the Roman legate, and Cumanus took many of these revolutionaries alive and crucified them at Lydda. So the Romans were crucifying all these revolutionary leaders all the time. So I don't think the New Testament story is very credible in this background, because they would have to be revolutionaries, all these people. But anyway, you have to make that up, decide for yourself on that, but it's not mentioned here. Some are beheaded, some are crucified. It's constant, but Josephus' history is as clearly not as impressive as earlier. His information is less precise. Now Felix takes over. And the bandits whom he crucified, and the local inhabitants in league with them, whom he caught and punished, were too many to count. So he crucified so many people that it was too many to count. And the country was cleared of bandits, and another tribe known as Sicarii, knife people, terrorists really, according to Josephus, came up. And they were so called because of the small daggers that they hid under their garments, with which they stabbed or assassinated people. And then the first to be so assassinated was Jonathan, this son of Ananus we heard previously. So these people were killing the high priests. Oh, but Ananus is the person that the New Testament says was at the trial of Jesus. So that means the revolutionaries were killing the people involved in the trial of Jesus. So that means that the Jewish mob is taking vengeance on all these people that the New Testament is portraying as having been representing the Jewish mob, which is not the case. All these people are being assassinated. Later on, when the war starts, they burn all the high priest palaces and kill as many high priests as they can. That is the Jews do. So I like to group people by their enemies. To me, like enemies are similar, and I think the revolutionaries have the same enemies as the Jesus people in the Scripture. So, and in fact, one of the people responsible for, according to the New Testament, the execution of Jesus is here killed by the terrorist groups. And then later, another brother of his, another Ananus, the son of Ananus, the brother of this Jonathan, is killed by the mobs when the uprising occurs, and his palace and everything burned, and he's the one responsible for the death of James, the brother of Jesus. So, we have quite a situation going on here. We have this Egyptian here. We're already in just almost in the 60s, who's leading a huge number of people from the Mount of Olives to enter the Jerusalem. So then the Mount of Olives, you see, is a prominent location for revolutionary unrest, where Jesus and his associates also are pictured as congregating. And Again, the Roman soldiers come in and butcher everybody. So when this died down, another festering sore appeared. It's 147. The religious frauds and bandit chiefs joined forces and drove numbers to revolt, inciting them to strike a blow for freedom, threatening with death any who submitted to Roman rule. This is like back then. Men willingly chose slavery would be forcibly freed. Then, splitting into groups, they raged over the countryside, plundering the well-to-do, killing the occupants, setting fire to the villages. Raging madness penetrated every corner of Judea. Day by day, the fighting blazed ever more fiercely. This is really the first picture of a situation of in revolutionary turmoil, class struggle. And Festus was sent out, and then another governor, Albinus, and basically we're coming up to the war here. So in the Antiquities, he says these people are in intent more dangerous than the revolutionaries, these religious frauds who joined forces with the bandit chiefs. Imposters, he calls them, pseudo-prophets. So I think this is the situation that is being portrayed to some extent in the literature we're familiar with. The next procurator, Festus, had to deal with the chief curse of the country, this bandits. And then Albinus, and then Florus. These are the Roman governors leading up to the war. He says at one point here, page 157 or something, 152 or something. This plea made Florus still more infurious. 151? 152. The total number that perished that day were around 3,600. Used to scourge even the upper class people and nail them to the cross, even if they enjoyed Roman equestrian status. He was crucifying, killing all kinds of people. Anyway, I just want to get to the outbreak of the uprising, and then we'll stop here. Then some people, chapter 9, took over Masada. And it turns out these are the Sicarii who take over Masada. We don't know that at this point, but by the end we realize these. So the Sicarii are just the extreme revolutionaries. They're the extreme zealots. So Judas the Galilean is the founder of both groups. He calls the Sicarii after the knife that they supposedly wear under their garments. It's the Sika, but I think it's more complicated than that. Anyway, so this is a situation of total disaster. The lower priesthood abolished the sacrifice offered to Rome and Caesar himself. Even though the chief priests and the others, the Herodian priests if you like, and the most prominent Pharisees want to continue the sacrifice to the emperor and to foreigners. And so the issue is sacrifice to foreigners and the Roman. And they also, at some point, they don't let Agrippa and his sister Bernice into the city. They stone them. Menachem, the son of Judas the Galilean that we mentioned, who led the revolt in Quirinius' time, broke into the armory. So we're getting tremendous problems here. And then I don't know where the actual breakout of the war is, but he says at one point that the Revolutionary Party wants to encourage the poor to revolt against the rich, and they want to burn all the debt records, and they stop sacrifice on behalf of Romans in the temple and other foreigners. And then also these more collaborating groups invite the Roman army into the city to put down the uprising. That's what he meant in the early part, that the Jews invited them in, that the chief priests, the Pharisees, and the men of power invite the Roman military commander to come into the city and put down the uprising. At that point, the crowds overwhelm the Roman soldiers, and there's a huge victory for the Jewish partisans, and the whole city is freed. And the city remains freed until it comes under siege 2 years later in 68 or 69. So in 66, the uprising breaks out, and it's led in various ways. You can read the rest of this yourself. Josephus, governor of Galilee. Okay, so now, I think, what about questions at the end here? So these predictions are